less than 1,000 protesters, completely encircled by police. They beat them with the sticks and they shot tear gas bombs, and the whole demonstration was separated and they were running after protesters.
So, Mona, are the police responding to violent protests from the crowd, or what are they doing?
They're at a loss how to respond, so they are responding in the only way they know right now, which is beating up and completely turning violent and aggressive.
Reports flood in of detentions and violence, changing the mood to one of defiance. Our reporters witness the use of excessive force.
I actually have to move. I have to move. Protesters are pelting a riot squad truck with stones.
An official 6 p.m. curfew is ignored, and by evening, the mission to reach Tahrir Square brings together at least 2,000 people.
That square has been cordoned off today by the security forces. They're not allowing people to get anywhere near it. It is the symbolic heart of Cairo, and the word Tahrir means liberation.
Sure enough, by night, our cameras capture the scene in Tahrir. Protesters have broken through police lines.
The protesters have lost their fear. They are determined to continue doing this. It doesn't show any signs of stopping.
News that several hundred Bedouin in the Sinai exchange gunfire with police proves this struggle no longer belongs to urbanite Egyptians. Amateur footage shows a 22-year-old there apparently killed by a single gunshot to the head. Mohammed El-Baradei, former top nuclear diplomat, returns to lead the crowds.
You know, I will be with them. They are my people, and I have to be there, and I'd like to see Egypt, a new Egypt. You know. Political support, moral support.
Up until this point, the protest movement has not had any specific leader to try and galvanise it and give it some kind of direction. Mohammed El-Baradei's arrival is going to be highly anticipated and is certainly something that President Mubarak will not be very happy to see him arrive.
But on the coattails of a grassroots uprising, he no longer represents everyone out on the streets.
Does it seem that confrontations have fizzled?
With blood now on Egypt's streets, filming becomes difficult. Attempts to block media coverage, which intensifies in days to come, as Al Jazeera and other journalists become the state's new scapegoats.
سيدتي وسادتي، نظرا لما شهدته بعض المحافظات من أعمال الشغب والخروج على القانون.
Overnight, Egypt has been unplugged. Shortly after midnight, internet and mobile networks had been shut off in the hope of paralyzing the protests.
The US-based internet monitoring site says it's an unprecedented event in history. The Egyptian government has effectively wiped their country from the global map.
And that's when alarm bells started to go off, because as soon as we realized that the internet had gone down, we knew that the government was in a very desperate mode. It was in a serious mode, and it was about to confront perhaps one of the biggest challenges.
Across the country, people had already agreed on more protests after prayers, calling for a day of rage.
We've heard reports from eyewitnesses that undercover informants from the government have infiltrated all the mosques, particularly those known to have a large Muslim Brotherhood gathering.
It seems to be a desperate action by the government. That seems to be the feeling on the streets as well. Why is the government resorting to such desperate measures? Because if anything is going to push these people over the edge.
By early afternoon, our correspondents in Cairo, Alexandria, and Suez were witnessing deliberate violence.
We went to the mosque in Giza. I noticed that the police posture was very, very aggressive, and almost instantly they started firing water cannons. As soon as that didn't work, they quickly began to fire tear gas. This scene was unbelievable. I mean, we had essentially become besieged in the mosque.
We are
breaking into programming here on Al Jazeera, 11:45 GMT, about 1:45 in the afternoon in Cairo, Egypt. Live continuing coverage here on Al Jazeera of a day of mass protest. They called it a day of rage. It is fast turning into that.
There were roughly 50,000 protesters as they walked through the streets of central Suez towards Al-Arba'in police station. The riot police sent 3 fire engines. The first 2 smashed through the crowd. They ran over several people in front of my eyes. That disproportionate force seemed to me like the trigger that made swathe after swathe of protesters literally throw themselves at the thousands of state security personnel and riot police who had gathered.
Medical workers in Suez count as many as 55 civilians and 15 policemen injured. Anger Friday told Mubarak and the watching world that actual regime change was the end goal, not simply the right to protest. It also announced the failure of the communications lockdown, as utter defiance and confrontation spread far from the capital. In Alexandria, 10 separate demonstrations with protesters chanting illegitimate. 100 took to the streets of the industrial town of Mahalla. Around 40,000 in Mansoura attempt to destroy ruling party offices. Thousands amassed in Damietta. And also in Port Said. Around 600 clashed with police in Ismailia, birthplace of the opposition group Muslim Brotherhood. In Suez, protesters took over the central square. And even touristic Luxor, far away in the south, saw a 15,000-strong march dispersed by tear gas.
That looks like a trail of tear gas there being fired in the foreground. There comes another one coming down as well. This is extraordinary. This is the capital of Egypt on a Friday afternoon.
You can see more tear gas being fired at the protesters, and more of them are coming our way. Yeah, sorry, Kamal, it's just where more tear gas canisters are being fired direction of our building, actually towards the protesters, and you can see.
Take your time.
1 second, stay with us, come on. Ahmed, بدل. تعال.
Is worsening here by the moment. I'm seeing, in fact, in front of me, a bloody body being carried through the streets, a march, and following it, people chanting, "There's no God but God. The martyr is loved by God."
By 6 p.m., the state strategy on the ground was changing.
Fighting is actually happening right in front of our office. What you're seeing there are the riot police making their way towards the bridge.
We never expected it to escalate the way it did, because it seemed that the protesters were determined to push the police and the riot police really further and further down the road. But every time they would fire tear gas canisters, they would call reinforcements, and they would try to push the protesters away off of the bridge.
Kamal, unbelievable pictures you're seeing there of crowds of protesters trying to dump the vehicle that is a personnel carrier that carries troops of the police. They're trying almost to knock it over the side of the bridge into the Nile. Yes, into the Nile.
Those police armored vehicles were notorious because they were what would carry political prisoners. They were what were used to try and suppress the people. Just their mere presence on the street would strike fear in the ordinary Egyptian.
The dynamic in Egypt is such that the Ministry of Interior and all of its police forces and various security apparatuses are widely despised in Egypt because they're widely considered as corrupt. They're seen as abusive. There's always allegations of human rights abuse against them. They're notoriously known for torturing prisoners, and they've always been, at the end of the day, seen as an institution that protects the regime, not protects the people. So indeed it was a complete game changer once the military had entered into the streets of Cairo. Everywhere you go,